Fix the engine and I'll give you something to eat. The words pierced the workshop like lightning, cutting through the clatter of tools and the pungent smell of burnt oil mixed with high-quality German grease. An elderly man, excessively thin, in worn clothes that were once blue but were now a faded gray, and with trembling hands marked by age spots, had just made a proposal that sounded utterly absurd to the mechanics at Stuttgart's most expensive and prestigious workshop. The laughter came instantly and cruelly. Experienced mechanics in impeccably clean overalls with the workshop's logo embroidered in gold, and chrome tools that gleamed like jewels, burst into laughter that echoed off the stainless steel walls. One of them, Thomas Muller, a robust German man of 6 feet 3 inches, his thick arms covered in tattoos of classic cars, wiped his greasy hands on a red cloth and walked over to the old man with heavy steps, shaking his head in utter disbelief. "Dude, are you lost? This isn't some cheap soup kitchen on Bahnhofstrasse. This is Muller Performance Shop, the most respected high-performance workshop in Germany. We fix Porsches, Ferraris, McLarens, Lamborghinis, ... Not some rusty old Volkswagen Beetle belonging to a retiree." The others laughed even louder, like hyenas around weak prey. Klaus Weber, the youngest of the group, a 24-year-old with gelled hair and an air of superiority typical of someone who graduated in automotive engineering but never really lived, pointed at the man disdainfully. "Look at the state he's in. I bet he doesn't even have money to buy a sandwich at the corner kiosk, let alone pay for an hour of our service. Do you know how much an hour costs your old man? 250 euros? He must have escaped from the asylum," laughed Stefan, another mechanic, wiping a wrench with a rag. "Someone calls social services before he has a heart attack in here and sues us." The laughter intensified. Some even took photos with their cell phones, as if it were an inside joke to share later in the WhatsApp group. The old man remained still, absorbing every word, every laugh, every disdainful glance. His hunched shoulders trembled slightly, but not from fear. It was something different, silent determination. Finally, he raised his right hand, marked by old calluses and welding burn scars, and pointed with a trembling finger to the center of the workshop. There, under the white LED lights that illuminated every detail, stood a 1973 Porsche 911 Carrera RS, painted in an immaculate white with the classic blue stripes running along the hood and roof. And the car was an automotive work of art, chromed and gleaming like a jewel displayed in a museum. But there was a problem that had been driving Thomas Muller crazy for 3 weeks. The engine was failing inexplicably, unpredictably, and frustratingly. It was both the pride and the shame of the workshop. A wealthy client had left his car there and was already threatening to sue Muller Performance Shop for incompetence. "That car," said the old man in a hoarse but firm voice, pointing directly at the Porsche, "has a problem with the timing of the crankshaft and camshaft. You replaced the rotation sensor, but you didn't realize that the camshaft is misaligned by exactly 2.3 degrees relative to the top dead center of the first cylinder. That's why it misfires precisely every 4,200 revolutions per minute. It's a factory calibration problem that affects about 0.3% of the models produced between March and June 1973. A brief, heavy silence filled the workshop. Thomas frowned deeply, creating wrinkles on his normally smooth forehead. Klaus stopped laughing and looked at Thomas, confused. Stefan dropped the key he was holding, which hit the concrete floor with a metallic clinking sound. For 3 seconds, maybe 4, the world seemed to freeze. The noise of the pneumatic tools in the background ceased. The radio playing German rock became inaudible. All 6 mechanics present in the workshop stared intently at that ragged old man who had just described, with surgical precision, exactly the problem they had been unable to identify for weeks. But then the laughter returned, even louder, more cruel, more deafening. "Ah, now he's a senior mechanical engineer at Porsche," mocked Rolf, a fat, red-bearded mechanic at the back of the workshop, clutching his stomach with laughter. "Next step, he'll teach us quantum physics and the theory of relativity applied to internal combustion. Crankshaft misaligned by 2.3 degrees. Klaus chuckled, mimicking the old man's trembling voice. He must have read that in a workshop manual he found in the trash. "Old man, you memorized the text well, but this is the real world." "Let him tinker with the car," said Thomas, now with a wicked grin on his face. "When he blows the engine, we'll call the police and he'll pay for the damage by selling his holy shoes at the flea market." More laughter. Some mechanics were banging on the workbenches, laughing so hard. Others were wiping tears from their eyes. It was as if the old man were an unwitting comedian, a sad clown who didn't realize he was making a joke. The old man remained motionless, but something shifted in his faded blue eyes. A spark, a distant memory, a deep sadness mixed with resignation. He had seen this before. The arrogance of youth, the disdain for experience, the belief that diplomas and expensive tools equal wisdom. Thomas crossed his arms over his broad chest, still smiling with superiority. But there was something different in his gaze now. He was curious by nature. He always had been. And that old man, even ragged and ridiculous, had spoken with an unusual technical precision. 2.3 degrees wasn't a random number someone would invent. "All right, you crazy old man," Thomas said, gesturing dramatically toward the Porsche. "You have exactly 15 minutes. If you fix it, I'll personally take you to dinner at the best restaurant in Stuttgart. But when you fail, and you will fail, you leave here and never come back. And we'll record everything and post your failure on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, and wherever else we can. You'll become a meme for the entire German internet. Deal?" The other mechanics clapped ironically, whistled, and shouted sarcastic encouragement. Klaus already had his cell phone in hand, recording. Stefan activated the workshop security camera to get the best angle. It was like a digital public execution about to happen. The old man simply nodded slowly, accepting the terms with a calmness that bordered on the supernatural. He walked slowly to the Porsche, each step feeling painful on his arthritic knees. When he reached the car, he extended his trembling hand and lightly touched the immaculate white hood. And something extraordinary happened. His fingers, which seconds before had trembled uncontrollably, now glided across the metal with a reverent, almost spiritual smoothness. Like a blind pianist recognizing his childhood piano. Like a soldier touching the metal of a fallen comrade. "I need tools," said the old man, turning to Thomas. His voice now had a different tone. It wasn't pleading. It was instruction. Thomas, still smiling, pointed to a basic toolbox near the workbench. "Here you go, Grandpa. We even have a screwdriver with a rubberized handle so your delicate little hands won't slip." More laughter. The man picked up the box, which was surprisingly heavy, and carried it to the Porsche with visible effort. He knelt on the cold, polished concrete floor beside the car. His knees creaked with the movement, drawing more laughter from the mechanics. "Be careful not to break your hip, Grandpa," Klaus shouted. "Does anyone have the number for an ambulance?" "What if he has a stroke?" Rolf added. But the old man didn't react to the insults. His hands, marked by decades of hard work, decades of engines, decades of metal and fire, touched the car's hood with a reverence that briefly silenced even the most mocking. There was something about the way he opened the hood. It wasn't the hurried manner of a modern mechanic. It was slow, methodical, almost ritualistic. The hood opened with a smooth click, revealing the 6-cylinder boxer engine, a masterpiece of German engineering. The Porsche's metal heart gleamed under the LED lights, each chrome piece reflecting like mirrors. The old man's eyes fell upon the engine, and something changed in his expression. The deep wrinkles around his eyes softened. His lips trembled as if he were about to say something exciting, but he only took a deep breath, inhaling the smell of oil and metal. He reached out his right hand and, with his fingers still slightly trembling, touched the engine block. His eyes closed for a moment. He seemed to be hearing something that no one else could hear. A silent conversation between man and machine. "Is he praying to the engine?" Stefan laughed. "That's new. Maybe he's a mechanical shaman." Klaus chuckled. "He'll do a rain dance to get the Porsche running." But Thomas didn't laugh this time. He watched, fascinated, the way the old man handled the engine. There was knowledge there was familiarity. Thomas had seen many mechanics in his life, good and bad, but he had never seen anyone handle an engine like that, as if he were a lost child finding his way back home. The old man opened his eyes and began to work. First, he removed the cylinder head cover with slow but absolutely precise movements. Not a single wrong screw. No hesitation. His hands, though trembling when still, became steady and sure when he held a tool. Klaus was still recording, but his smile was beginning to falter. He knows where the screws are without even looking at the manual," he murmured to Stefan. "Lucky," Stefan replied, but his voice no longer held the same conviction. The old man removed the cover completely, exposing the crankshaft and camshaft. With a small flashlight he took from the worn pocket of his Khotan old flashlight, the kind used in the 70s, he illuminated the inside of the engine, inspecting every millimeter with eyes that, despite their age, saw with surgical precision. Then he pulled something from the inside pocket of his coat that made Thomas take 3 steps forward in disbelief. It was an original Michutoyo caliper, old, worn from use, but perfectly calibrated. The kind of tool that costs more than the old man's entire coat. Where did he get that? Klaus whispered to no one in particular. The old man carefully measured the angle of the camshaft relative to the crankshaft. His eyes narrowed as he read the measurement. 2.3 degrees, he murmured to himself so quietly that only Thomas, who was now closer, could hear. Just as I said. Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. This couldn't be. It wasn't humanly possible to diagnose such a specific problem just by listening to the engine misfire or looking at it from a distance. It required precise measurement, specialized equipment, time, unless ... No, it wasn't possible. The old man continued working. He picked up a regular wrench, adjusted the size precisely, and began loosening the bolts on the camshaft support. His movements were economical, efficient, almost mechanical in their perfection. There was no hesitation. There was no trial and error. He knew exactly what to do in what order and with what force to apply this ... This isn't normal, said Stefan, now serious, watching from a distance. He didn't consult any manuals, added Rolf, who had completely stopped laughing. Not once. Klaus was still recording, but his phone was shaking in his hands. The mocking smile had completely vanished from his young face. 10 minutes passed in almost religious silence. The entire workshop had stopped working. The 6 mechanics who, minutes before, had been laughing like hyenas, now formed a semicircle around the old man and the Porsche, observing every movement with a mixture of disbelief and growing respect. The elderly man adjusted the camshaft with a precision that seemed impossible for someone working only with basic tools. He used a small rubber mallet, which he also took from his own pocket, to make delicate, meticulously calculated taps on the shaft. Talk, talk, talk. Each beat was smooth, controlled, like a Swiss watchmaker adjusting a precision mechanism, like a surgeon performing a delicate operation, like an artist putting the finishing touches on a sculpture. Thomas was completely mesmerized. He had studied mechanical engineering for 5 years at university. He had worked in workshops for another 10 years. He had certifications, awards, recognition, but never, never had he seen anyone work like that. It wasn't modern technique. It was something older, purer. It was the kind of knowledge that doesn't come from books or YouTube videos. It was knowledge that comes from blood, sweat, and decades of absolute dedication. The old man finally replaced the cylinder head cover, tightened each bolt in the correct sequence, diagonally, as it should be done to distribute the pressure evenly, and closed the hood with a smooth, satisfying click. He wiped his hands with an old, worn rag he pulled from his pocket, stained with oil and memories. When he finished, he stood with difficulty, his knees protesting, and turned to Thomas. "Start the engine," he said simply. His voice wasn't arrogant, there was no triumph. It was just a technical instruction, as if he were instructing a trainee. Thomas stood still for a moment, his heart pounding in his chest. Part of him didn't want to start the engine, because if the old man was right, if the Porsche worked perfectly. He looked at Klaus, then Stefan, then Rolf. They were all pale, tense, waiting. The air in the workshop was heavy with anticipation. Thomas took a deep breath and walked over to the Porsche. He opened the driver's door, which creaked slightly, as it always did in older models, and slid into the original black leather seat. The smell of the interior was distinctive. Aged leather, German varnish, automotive history. He gripped the key with hands that now trembled. He looked through the windshield and saw the old man staring directly at him. Those faded blue eyes didn't blink. There was no doubt in them. There was absolute certainty. Thomas turned the key. The engine sputtered once. Thomas's heart stopped. Then the engine roared to life. But it wasn't just any roar. It was the roar. The perfect, clear, powerful sound of a 1973 Porsche 911 Carrera RS performing exactly as Ferdinand Porsche had envisioned it when he designed it. It was music. It was mechanical poetry. It was perfection. Thomas lightly pressed the accelerator. 1,000 revolutions per minute. 2,000, 3,000. The engine responded smoothly, steadily. 4,000 revolutions per minute. 4,200 revolutions per minute. The exact point where it always stalled. No flaws. 5,000 revolutions. 6,000. 7,000. No flaws. Just the perfect purr of 6 cylinders working in absolute harmony. Klaus dropped his cell phone, which hit the concrete floor with a dull thud. Svetchin covered his mouth with both hands, inexplicable tears welling up in his eyes. Rolf simply slumped into a seated position on a stool, his face as pale as plaster. Thomas turned off the engine. The silence that followed was deafening. He got out of the car with trembling legs as if he had just witnessed a religious miracle. And perhaps he had. He walked slowly toward the old man who remained standing, his hands in his pockets, his face expressionless. When he got close, Thomas realized he was crying. Hot tears streamed down his face uncontrollably. "How?" Thomas's voice came out broken, hoarse. "How did you do that?" The old man looked at him for a long moment. Then, for the first time since he had entered the workshop, he smiled. It was a tired, sad, but satisfied smile. "Because I helped design that engine." The world stopped. Someone could have heard a feather fall to the ground at that moment. The 6 mechanics stood completely still, like statues of salt, processing the words they had just heard. Thomas took a step back, staggering. What did you say?" The old man took his hands out of his pockets. His posture, which had previously been hunched and defeated, now straightened slightly. He no longer seemed so frail. There was a dignity there that no worn-out clothing could hide. "My name is Helmut Becker. I worked directly with Ferdinand Alexander Porsche, Ferry Porsche's son, during the development of the 911 between 1963 and 1975. I was an assistant engineer specializing in boxer engine synchronization and cooling systems. This particular model," he pointed to the white Porsche, "from 1973, I personally tuned 3 prototypes before it was approved for series production. I know every screw, every millimeter, every detail of this engine, because I was there when it was born." Klaus's legs gave way. Literally. He fell to his knees on the floor, his hands trembling uncontrollably. Stefan leaned heavily against a workbench, all the blood drained from his face. Rolf, the oldest of the mechanics after Thomas, began to cry openly, covering his face with his grease-stained hands. Thomas couldn't breathe. His chest was tight, as if a steel vice were crushing his lungs. "Helmut Becker," he repeated the name almost in a whisper. "Helmut Becker?" He staggered to a shelf where the workshop's old technical manuals were kept. With trembling hands, he picked up a thick book, bound in worn red leather. Porsche 911, Technical History 1963 to 1975. He feverishly opened the pages, searching, and he found it. Page 247. A black and white photo from 1968. Ferdinand Alexander Porsche, in the center, smiling, surrounded by his team of engineers. And there in the second row, on the left, was he, a young, thin man with dark hair and bright eyes, holding a Michutoyo caliper, the same caliper that was now in the old man's pocket. Below the photo, the caption reads, 911 Engine Development Team. From left to right, second row, Helmut Becker Synchronization and Cooling. Klaus Hoffmann Transmission System. Quotes. The book fell from Thomas's hands and hit the floor with a thud that echoed through the silent workshop. "Mr. Becker," Thomas tried to speak, but his voice failed him. He cleared his throat, wiping away the tears that wouldn't stop streaming down his face. "Becker, my God, we didn't know. Please, forgive us." Klaus was crying like a child on the floor. "I mocked you," he sobbed, hugging his knees. "I mocked a legend. I mocked someone who was there when it all began. I'm an idiot. I'm a complete idiot." Stefan approached slowly, reverently removing his cap as if he were in church. "Mr. Becker, I read about you when I was at university. There's a whole article about your work on air conditioning systems. When the original design was overheating, it was you who suggested redesigning the airflow. You saved the whole project. And I laughed at you." Rolf, the older mechanic, approached slowly. His hands trembled as he extended his right hand to Helmut. "Mr. Becker, I'm 58 years old. I've been working with Porsche since 1985. You are one of the heroes of my life. I have a 1974-911 in my garage at home. It's my most prized possession. And to know that you helped create that car, and that I was so disrespectful, I'm speechless." Helmut looked at them all. His expression wasn't one of anger. It wasn't one of vengeful satisfaction. It was something deeper. Sadness. Resignation. As if he had seen this before. As if he knew the world had forgotten him. Men like him, the pioneers who had built with their own hands the empires that others now comfortably managed. "You judged a book by its cover," said Helmut, his voice soft but firm. "You saw a poor old man in tattered clothes and assumed I was worthless. You assumed that someone without money can't have knowledge. You assumed that appearance is more important than experience." He took a few steps around the workshop, lightly touching the chrome tools on the workbenches. "When I worked with Ferry Porsche and his son Ferdinand Alexander, we didn't have these beautiful and expensive tools. We worked with what we had, and you know what we had? Passion, knowledge, respect for the craft, respect for each other. Thomas was on his knees now, his hands clasped as if in prayer. Mr. Becker, please accept our apologies. What can we do? What can we give you? Money? How much do you need? A job here in the workshop? You can have anything you want. Helmut shook his head slowly. I don't want your money, Thomas. I don't want a job. You don't need to give me anything more than what I promised at the beginning. He paused, looking directly into Thomas's eyes. I said what I wanted. Food. The silence that followed was heavy with utter shame. Food, Thomas repeated, his voice breaking. Just food? Yes, Helmut confirmed simply. I haven't eaten since yesterday morning. The Porsche pension is late. Bureaucratic problems with paperwork. They say it will take another 2 weeks to resolve. I'm 82 years old. I worked 40 years of my life in engines. I helped build a brand that is now worth billions. I have 17 patents registered in my name. And now, at the end of my life, sometimes I don't even have money for a hot meal. Klaus buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with sobs. Stefan turned and punched the wall in frustration and shame, leaving a bloody mark where his knuckles hit the concrete. Rolf simply wept silently, tears falling onto his protruding belly. Thomas stood up, wiped his face, and walked quickly to his office. He returned seconds later with his wallet. Taking out all the euros he had, it must have been about 300, maybe 400. He held the money out to Helmut with both hands. Please, Mr. Becker, please accept it. It's very little for what you've done, for who you are, but please double. Quotes. Helmut looked at the money but didn't take it. Thomas, I didn't come here to extort you. I came here because I was hungry and saw a Porsche that I recognized had problems. I thought maybe I could exchange knowledge for food, that's all. No. Klaus stood up suddenly, wiping away tears with the sleeve of his overalls. No, Mr. Becker. I'm going to get food now, the best restaurant in town. He ran out of the workshop before anyone could say anything. While Klaus was away, a heavy silence hung over the workshop. No one knew what to say. No one knew how to fix what they had broken, not an engine, but a man's dignity. Stefan finally broke the silence. Mr. Becker, do you still work with cars? Helmut gave a small, sad smile. Sometimes, when I can, when someone gives me a chance. But you see how it is. A ragged old man doesn't inspire confidence. People look at me and see someone disposable, someone the world has left behind. Thomas sat heavily on a stool, his head in his hands. We do this every day, don't we? We judge people by what they wear, what kind of car they drive, how much money they seem to have, and we forget that experience is priceless. True knowledge doesn't come with a price tag. Yes, Helmut agreed softly. And that's why so many treasures are lost. So many stories go untold. So much knowledge dies with the people because no one bothered to ask, to listen, to respect. Rolf approached, wiping his red eyes. Mr. Becker, may I ask a question? Of course. Why didn't you say who you were from the beginning? Why did you let us mock you? Helmut sighed deeply. Because I shouldn't have to say who I am to be treated with basic dignity. Every human being deserves respect, whether they're a Porsche engineer or a beggar on the street. If I had to show my credentials to be treated decently, then you wouldn't have learned anything. The words fell like heavy stones on the mechanics. It was a harsh, undeniable truth. Besides, Helmut continued with a melancholy smile, I wanted to see if I was still capable. It's been a long time since I worked on a real engine. Sometimes I wake up at night and wonder if I really did what they say I did. If I was really there in those golden days when we built the impossible, or if it's all just a hazy memory of a tired old man. You were there, Thomas said with conviction, looking at the Porsche that now roared perfectly. And what you built still lives. Still breathes. Still runs. 15 minutes later, Klaus returned breathless, carrying not one but 4 large bags from one of Stuttgart's most expensive restaurants. The smell of hot food schnitzel, baked potatoes, French onion soup, fresh bread filled the workshop. Mr. Becker, Klaus carefully placed the bags on a clean table with reverent care. I ordered the best they had. Please eat as much as you like. And there was money left over, so I brought this too. He took an envelope from his pocket and placed it on the table. That's 1,000 euros. It's nothing compared to what you deserve, but please accept it. Use it for your expenses until your pension arrives. Helmut looked at the food, at the envelope, at the regretful faces of the mechanics around him. His eyes, already brimming with tears, finally let escape, trickling down his wrinkled cheeks. You don't need to do this, he said, his voice breaking. Yes, we need to, Klaus insisted, kneeling beside the table. We need to because we were cruel. We need to because you taught us something no university teaches. We need to because we want to be better men than we were an hour ago. Helmut picked up one of the trays with trembling hands and began to eat slowly. The first sip of the hot soup made his eyes close in silent gratitude. The mechanics watched in respectful silence, each reflecting on their own actions, their own casual cruelties over the years. While Helmut ate, Thomas pulled up a chair and sat down beside him. "Mr. Becker, may I ask a few questions? About old times?" Helmut nodded, still chewing. "What was it like? Working with Ferry Portia, with Ferdinand Alexander?" Helmut's eyes lit up, decades of memories resurfacing. Ferry was ... a visionary, but not the kind who just dreams. He got his hands dirty. I saw him many times in the workshop, his hands covered in oil, working alongside us. Ferdinand Alexander, his son, was more of an artist. He saw the cars as moving sculptures. But they both had something in common: absolute respect for every person on the team. "Did you work long hours?" "Entire days, sometimes." There was a problem with the cooling system of the first 911 prototype. The engine would overheat after only 20 minutes of intense use. We spent 3 straight days in the workshop, sleeping in shifts until we found the solution. It was Ferdinand Alexander who had the idea of redesigning the airflow, but I was the one who calculated the exact angles, the precise openings. We worked together, side by side, engineer and designer, until we got it right. Klaus had pulled up another chair, the other mechanics forming a circle around him. It was like children listening to stories from a wise grandfather. "And when was the first 911 ready?" Stefan asked. "What was it like?" Helmut smiled, his eyes distant. "It was a day in September 1963. It rained in the morning, but the sun came out in the afternoon. Ferry Portia himself drove the prototype for the first time. We were all on the side of the track, nervous like parents waiting for their child's first cry. When the engine started and that sound, that perfect sound, filled the air, some of us cried. I cried. I would have cried too," Rolf admitted, wiping his eyes again. Helmut continued eating and talking, and the mechanics listened to every word as if it were sacred scripture. He spoke of the technical challenges, the failures that preceded the successes, the sleepless nights, the small and large victories. He spoke of colleagues who were no longer alive, of innovations that became industry standards, of a time when building a car was almost like creating art. 2 hours had passed. The food had grown cold, but the conversation remained heated. Helmut no longer seemed like a frail, defeated old man. He was animated, gesturing with his hands as he explained technical details, his eyes shining with the passion that decades of hard living had not been able to completely extinguish. "Mr. Becker," Thomas said finally, interrupting a story about the development of the braking system, "you need to come back here. Not as a customer, not as someone asking for charity, but as a teacher, as a mentor." Klaus agreed enthusiastically. "Yes, please, Mr. Becker. We pay well, very well. You can come whenever you want, as many times as you want. And just do whatever you want to do. Fix cars or just sit and tell us stories, whatever." Helmut hesitated. "Boys, I don't want charity ... It's not charity," Thomas insisted. "It's justice. It's what you deserve, and it's what we need. Look at us. We have the best tools in Germany. We have certificates hanging on the wall. But what just happened here proved that we know nothing, absolute nothing compared to what you know." Stefan stood up, wiping his hands on his overalls. "Mr. Becker, I have a 12-year-old son. He wants to be a mechanic. I want him to grow up hearing stories of men like you, real men who built the world with their own hands. Not Instagram influencers who make videos modifying cars with their dad's money." Rolf placed a heavy hand on Helmut's shoulder. "Sir, I'm nearing retirement. Before I leave, I want to learn for real. Not from a manual, from someone who was there when history happened." Helmut looked at each of them, seeing genuine sincerity in their eyes. It wasn't pity. It wasn't guilt trying to redeem itself with money. It was true respect. It was the recognition that he had something valuable to offer. "All right," he said finally, his voice breaking slightly. "I'll come back. But not as an employee, as a partner. You give me space, tools if I need them, and perhaps a modest salary. In return, I'll teach you what I know. Everything I know. Down to the last screw, the last measurement, the last story. Done." Thomas extended his hand and Helmut shook it. It wasn't a business handshake. It was a brotherly handshake. A handshake of mutual respect. Klaus wiped away his tears and had a sudden idea. "Mr. Becker, that Porsche you fixed? The owner's threatening to sue us because he's been waiting for 3 weeks, but now it works. When he comes to pick it up, would you be willing to meet him? I think he'd love to know that one of the original creators of the 911 personally fixed his car." Helmut smiled. "Yes, I would love to." 3 days later, the workshop looked different. An area in the back had been cleaned and organized. A solid oak table, a comfortable chair, a bookshelf with old and new technical books, and a discreet sign on the wall, Helmut Becker, Space Master Engineer. The owner of the white Porsche, an arrogant businessman named Herr Schmidt, arrived at 10 a.m., irritated and impatient. He entered the workshop complaining loudly. 3 weeks. 3 weeks to fix a simple engine problem. Are you incompetent or dishonest? Thomas took a deep breath, remaining calm. Mr. Schmidt, your car is ready, and I'd like to introduce it to someone. Presentation? I don't have time for presentations. I want my car. I understand, sir, but I think you'll want to meet the man who fixed your Porsche. Herr Schmidt snorted but followed Thomas to the back of the workshop. There, seated at the oak table, was Helmut. He rose as they approached, extending his hand politely. Mr. Schmidt, this is Helmut Becker. He was the one who diagnosed and fixed the timing problem in your engine. Schmidt looked at Helmut with evident disdain. An old man in simple clothes, now cleaner, courtesy of Klaus, who had taken Helmut to buy some new clothes. This old man? Are you kidding me? Or not, Thomas said, keeping his voice steady. Mr. Becker worked directly on the original development of the 911. He knows that engine better than anyone alive today. Schmidt let out a cynical laugh. Oh, sure, and I'm the king of Bavaria. You really expect me to believe that ... double quotes, Helmut interrupted gently. Your Porsche is a 1973 Carrera RS produced in week 17 of that year, if I'm not mistaken, based on the serial number configuration. It has the 911 73rds type engine with approximately 210 horsepower. The problem you were experiencing was a timing fault at every 4,200 revolutions per minute because the camshaft was misaligned by 2.3 degrees relative to top dead center. It's a factory defect that affects 0.3% of the models from that specific production period. Schmidt stopped laughing. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Furthermore, Helmut continued calmly, if you look under the trunk mat, you'll find the signature of the technician who did the final quality inspection at the factory. It should be on a small metal sticker. On about 30% of the cars in that batch, there's my signature, HB. Okay. Schmidt ran to the Porsche as if possessed. He opened the trunk, threw the emergency kit tools aside, pulled back the carpet ... and there it was. A small metallic sticker, oxidized by time. And on it, written in faded permanent marker, HB. Okay, Mr. Schmidt turned completely pale. He slowly returned to where Helmut was, staggering as if he had been punched. Sir ... Mr. Becker, I didn't know. Please forgive me. Helmut gave a slight smile. Your car is perfect now. Take good care of it. It was made with love. Schmidt shook Helmut's hand reverently, almost bowing in a curtsy. When he drove out of the workshop in the Porsche, which now purred perfectly, tears welled in his eyes. It was no longer just a car to him, it was a piece of living history. In the months that followed, Helmut Becker's story spread throughout Stuttgart, then Germany, and then the world of Porsche enthusiasts. Thomas's workshop became known not only for its services, but for the rare opportunity to meet a living legend. Helmut came 3 times a week. Sometimes he fixed cars, sometimes he just sat and talked with the mechanics, teaching not only techniques, but philosophy, patience, attention to detail, respect for the craft and for people. Klaus, who had mocked him most cruelly, became Helmut's most dedicated student. He would arrive an hour early just to have coffee with the old master and listen to stories. His work improved dramatically. His arrogance evaporated, replaced by genuine humility. The workshop put up a sign at the entrance, Muller Performance Shop, Lorette Helmut Becker, in Gunhero Original de Porsche 911. And below, in smaller print but no less important, here we learn that respect comes before appearance. Here we judge people by their hearts, not by their clothes. Here we honor those who built the world we have inherited. Helmut lived for 7 more years after that day. At 89 years old, he passed away peacefully in his sleep. But he did not die alone or forgotten. He died surrounded by Thomas, Klaus, Stefan, Rolf, and dozens of other mechanics and enthusiasts whom he had taught, inspired, and transformed. His funeral was held in Stuttgart. More than 500 people attended. There were Porsche executives, former colleagues, mechanics from all over Europe. And in a gesture that would have made Helmut smile, a line of 30 classic Porsche 911s escorted the coffin to the cemetery, their perfectly synchronized engines roaring in tribute. Thomas delivered the eulogy. With a choked voice, he said, Helmut Becker didn't just teach us about engines. He taught us about humanity. He taught us that greatness isn't measured by what we wear or how much we earn, but by what we do with our knowledge and how we treat the people around us. He taught us that the greatest treasures often come in the simplest packages. And he taught us that it's never ever too late to ask for forgiveness and to be a better person. In the workshop, Helmut's space remained untouched, transformed into a small museum. His desk, his tools, photos of him in his glory days and next to the white 1973 Porsche that he repaired on that memorable day. And sometimes late at night when the workshop was empty and silent, Thomas swore he could hear the distant sound of a perfectly tuned boxer engine and the gentle laughter of a wise old man who had repaired more than just engines that German winter afternoon. He mended hearts. He mended souls. And he taught everyone that sometimes the biggest engine that needs fixing isn't the car's engine. It's from the heart.